Welcome to Mansplaining, a podcast about the interesting things and unexpected discoveries you can make if you just take the time to learn. I'm Mark, your host this week, and as always, I'm joined by Joe, an old friend from college. Together, we'll explore what's on our minds and hopefully figure out a thing or two about a thing or two. How's it going, Joe?
Going okay, Mark. New York City is gradually opening up after the COVID nightmare, so I'm excited about what the future holds. How about you?
Doing okay, but one thing I heard coming out of New York news this week has probably made students less excited about the future. That's coming out of the pandemic. The New York school system has canceled all future snow days, and when it snows in the future, students will be expected to join virtually, which kind of sucks, I have to say.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that reminds me, I meant to tell that to my daughter, give her that news in case she didn't hear it. So after we're done, I think that's the first thing I'll do. Give her the bad news.
Or maybe wait until she listens to this podcast. This is going to be how you break it to her.
Well, we might be waiting a long time for that. Unless we do a one on TikTok or something, then maybe she'll tune in.
There we go. That's the next mansplaining field to conquer is the world of TikTok.
Right.
So let's just get into it.
Sure.
This week's topic is something that I have been thinking about for a long time, but mostly in fictional rather than real terms, which is I'm a big science fiction fan and a huge movie buff, which means that I've been exposed to the question of like AI in a warfare context for a long, long time, going back at least as far as the Terminator, where, of course, the basic premise is that a military AI called Skynet becomes self-aware and immediately sets out to exterminate humanity.
Right.
And recently I read a fairly trashy novel in which the premise was that a terrorist group was using AI-controlled drones to precisely target the explosives they were using against the United States. And winding through all of this is basically a question which I think confronts us as a human civilization, which is, to date, there are AI systems in the military, but no AI is empowered to pull the trigger. It's always a human who decides whether or not to use lethal force. And I feel like that's a line that is going to get crossed eventually. It's just a question of when, not if. And so my question to you, Joe, is that. So what is our future of artificial intelligence in warfare, and what is it going to mean about how war is conducted?
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting question, and I must admit this was a tough one for me to research because I started from almost zero knowledge about it, which made it really difficult to figure out what to read and what not to read. But I am prepared to give you an answer to both of your questions. And as is my wont, I like to start with a short answer to kind of frame what I'm going to tell you. And the short answer to your first question about how close are we to fully autonomous warfare is that technologically we're dangerously close to fully autonomous warfare. But there is an international effort underway to prevent us from ever crossing that threshold. And to your second question about how that might change the nature of warfare, my answer is, regardless of whether we see such weapons on the battlefield, AI is very likely to change the nature of warfare in profound ways. But let's define some terms before we get into the weeds. First, I need to disabuse you of your use of the term drone. That's so 2010s, Mark. We're in the 2020s now. You got to get with the jargon.
I'm not hip with the kids anymore.
In my research for this episode, I came across many, many acronyms for these vehicles and the various U.S. military projects they're associated with. So many acronyms, in fact, that I'm activating the red alert klaxon to warn you and our listeners that I'm about to unleash a dizzying barrage of acronyms that might drive you to gouge your eyeballs, or God forbid, somebody else's eyeballs.
Well, I can tell you that my stress levels are rising with this klaxon playing in the background.
So please, for the safety of you and your loved ones, stay away from all gougeable objects until I'm done with this litany. Here goes. Unmanned Air Vehicle, UAV. Unmanned Reconnaissance Aerial Vehicle, URAV. Unmanned Combat Aerial Vehicle, UCAV. Remotely Piloted Aircraft, RPA. Miniature Pilotless Aircraft, MPA. Small Unmanned Aircraft System, SUAS. Then you have the new generation of quicker vehicles created under the Fast Lightweight Autonomy Program, or FLAP. Those have less maximum takeoff weight, or MTOW. Then there's the Navy and Air Force's Joint Unmanned Combat Air System, or JUCAS, which became known as NUCAS after the Navy made it a carrier-based operation. All these systems are armed with Joint Direct Attack Munitions, JDAM, and are managed by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA. At least these weapons have pleasant, relaxing names like Predator, Reaper, Avenger, and my favorite, the Hunter-Killer.
Nice, nice. My advice to our listeners is find someone who loves you as much as the military loves a good acronym.
Yeah, ain't it the truth? So I know that's TMI, Mark. I can't promise not to use any more acronyms in this podcast, but I will promise to call these vehicles UAVs when referring to their military uses. So Unmanned Air Vehicle, UAV, for military use, and I'll call them drones when referring to all other uses.
Okay.
So let me say a few words about drones generally, because I think it helps to contextualize what the military is doing. Drones are useful because they are easily controlled via smartphone apps, and they require very little effort, time, or energy to reach their destinations. Drone technology has advanced in leaps and bounds in recent years, and drones are now being adopted worldwide for a wide variety of commercial and personal uses, including, but not limited to, aerial photography for journalism, film and commercial sales, search and rescue operations, geographic mapping of inaccessible terrain, disaster management, law enforcement, border control and surveillance, and storm tracking of hurricanes and tornadoes. The personal use of drones has skyrocketed in recent years. By the end of 2019, there were about 1.32 million recreational drones in use in the USA, controlled by about 990,000 registered operators who use them for things like still photography, filmmaking, and gaming. Consumers alone will spend $17 billion in the next few years on new drones. Now, the commercial drone market expects to see growth from $4.4 billion in 2018 to $63.6 billion by 2025, while drone shipments should hit 29 million by the end of this year. As they become more and more customizable, we could soon see drones doing things like fertilizing crops, monitoring traffic incidents, or delivering pizza. And can Amazon be far behind?
No, absolutely not. In fact, I was interviewing for a job at Amazon back a long time ago and talked to a man who was very, very excited about Amazon's drone delivery project. He thought that it would totally revolutionize deliveries in this country.
Yeah. That man may be an Amazon combat drone pilot sooner or later, once they go to war with the other delivery services. And speaking of Amazon, one of its affiliates studied drone technology and reported that it has 7 potential generations, spanning from the rudimentary remote-controlled putt-putts in Generation 1 to the fully autonomous vehicles in Generation 7. Here's the interesting thing. Most of our current technology sits in either the 5th or 6th generation, described as having, quote, intelligent piloting models, but not quite full autonomy. Generation 7 is already on the drawing board and will include features like full space awareness and auto action for takeoffs, landings, and mission execution. Mm-hmm. The roots of military drone technology go all the way back to World War I, when both France and the U.S. worked on developing unmanned automatic airplanes. though UAVs were imagined for combat as far back as an article in Popular Mechanics in 1940. The modern military UAV can be traced to the work of nuclear physicist John Stewart Foster Jr. in the early 1970s. The first prototypes were powered by modified lawnmower engines. Israel pioneered the use of UAVs for reconnaissance and as decoys in combat in the 1970s and 80s. The first conflict in which UAVs were commonplace was the first Gulf War in the early 1990s, again mostly for recon missions.
Mm-hmm.
After that success, militaries from many countries invested in developing UAVs for use in combat. In Iraq and Afghanistan, UAVs were used routinely to provide overhead surveillance and to detect and dispose of bombs and IEDs. UAVs are now used by at least a couple dozen countries besides Israel and the U.S., including China, Russia, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the UK, Italy, and France. And now we have the beginnings of an arms race among the major powers like the U.S. and China. Non-state actors like ISIS have also gotten in on the action, adapting commercial drones for surveillance and to deliver grenades and other explosives using improvised cradles.
Mm-hmm. Much like that book that I read.
Yes. The first kill made by an American UAV happened in October 2001 in Kandahar, Afghanistan. But by June 2015, the estimated death toll from American UAV strikes was north of 6,000. Many of us recall news stories like the one about the UAV attack in Yemen in December 2013 that killed members of a wedding party mistakenly identified as a caravan of terrorists. Independent estimates are all over the map regarding whether we're successfully hitting our intended targets. In 2009, the Brookings Institution reported that for every militant killed in U.S.-led UAV attacks in Pakistan, 10 civilians also died.
Mm-hmm.
A report released by the New America Foundation, drawing on what it called credible reporting, claimed that 2/3 of people killed by UAV strikes in Afghanistan and Pakistan were militants, while 1/3 were civilians. Estimates from NGOs like the Bureau of Investigative Journalism suggest civilian fatality rates between 7% and 15% from UAV strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia between 2009 and 2019. So you see how the numbers are kind of all over the place.
Right.
But needless to say, the U.S. government's reported numbers of civilian casualties are much lower.
Sure. Yeah. And of course, it's in a situation like Afghanistan or where you're combating the Taliban, it's very difficult. I do not want to be the spokesperson for military policy here, but it's very difficult in that to define who's a combatant and who is not. That's basically the challenge of fighting insurrectionist forces of that nature, going all the way back to Vietnam, is that they're not wearing uniforms. So it's almost a judgment call of whether or not they are enemies or not.
Quite right. And I was happy to learn that there are a bunch of good government groups out there and nonprofits trying to figure this out. I think we can't trust the combatants to be honest about that. But regardless of which estimate is closer to the truth, one thing is clear. UAVs guided by human beings make plenty of errors. So you have to wonder, how could the error rate for fully autonomous UAV strikes not be higher?
Mm-hmm.
It's also clear that UAVs are not going away. In 2013, the 1,300 UAV operators in the Air Force comprised 8.5% of its total population of pilots, up from 3.3% just 5 years earlier. And by the following year, 2014, the Air Force was training more UAV pilots than fighter and bomber pilots combined. How about that?
Yeah, it just seems like there's an inescapable economics for this, that a fighter pilot with his training and his experience, and then just, of course, the human desire not to send other humans into harm's way. It's just a much more expensive proposition to send a human into a dangerous situation than it is to send a machine.
Yes.
And as the technology enables that, it just seems like they are never going to stop making that decision. They will make that decision more often, not less.
True, but as we're about to hear, UAV pilots are not exactly out of harm's way.
Mm.
The Air Force's School of Aerospace Medicine reported in 2011 that nearly 50% of UAV pilots suffer from high levels of stress. Some experience PTSD after killing civilians, especially if they're children.
Mm-hmm.
It's worse for UAV pilots than for bomber or fighter pilots because the UAV pilots are forced to idle their vehicles over the strike to report on the damage, and they often see the effects of their work in grisly detail.
Eesh.
Writer Mark Bowden, in a piece for The Atlantic, gave us a glimpse of that reality. I'm quoting Bowden's article now. The pilot sees the carnage close up in real time. The blood and severed body parts, the arrival of emergency responders, the anguish of friends and family. Often he's been watching the people he kills for a long time before pulling the trigger. Drone pilots become familiar with their victims. They see them in the ordinary rhythms of their lives, with their wives and friends, with their children. War by remote control turns out to be intimate and disturbing. Pilots are sometimes shaken." End quote. And of course, for all the anguish visited on the perpetrator of the carnage, it is so much worse for the victims who are non-combatants, the innocent men, women, and children on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
As a result of the relentless march of technology, UAVs are becoming more and more autonomous. Most American UAVs, like the Predator, are already considered semi-autonomous because they are remotely piloted using satellites. But one of the newer UAVs, the Global Hawk, is almost fully autonomous. The operator presses a button for takeoffs and landings, while the vehicle gets directions from GPS technology and sends back a live feed of its flight. This thing can fly for days at a time and has the capability of going from San Francisco clear across the country and completely mapping the entire state of Maine before having to return.
Wow.
And autonomy is not unique to UAVs. There are also UUVs, unmanned underwater vehicles. In April 2016, the U.S. Navy christened the Sea Hunter, the prototype of an anti-submarine warfare unmanned vehicle. Get this. It's a 132-foot craft that has no onboard crew. Its job is to travel the waters of the world for months at a time, searching for enemy subs and reporting their locations to its remote human operators. If they prove viable, UUVs may soon be deployed with algorithms allowing them to attack enemy subs on their own. Meanwhile, the Army is testing an unarmed robotic vehicle called the Squad Multipurpose Equipment Transport, or SMET, while also developing a robotic combat vehicle, or RCV. Maybe I should put on that red alert klaxon again. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. According to a defense industry publication, quote, "When equipped with advanced sensors and artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons could be trained to operate in coordinated swarms or wolf packs, overwhelming enemy defenders and affording a speedy victory." End quote.
Right. Yeah.
So that makes me wonder, what might that look like? In my research, I came across a 7-minute, 47-second video called Slaughterbots that posits a chilling potential future. This video has already received over 3 million views on YouTube since its posting in the fall of 2017. It's best described as Black Mirror meets one of those slick Steve Jobs presentations for Apple. Set in the near future, it shows the hypothetical unveiling of a new product that promises to surgically remove all the bad guys with zero collateral damage. But you can decide for yourself whether that's true. We're going to post the Slaughterbots video, the URL, to our Facebook page so our listeners can watch it. But Mark, I want you to watch it right now so we can talk about it. So we'll turn off our mics while Mark watches the video, and we'll come right back after. Okay, we're back. Mark, I want to get your reaction to the Slaughterbots video. What did you think?
Well, it's certainly a chilling scenario. The notion that basically lethal, highly targeted force would be essentially democratized, where the technology would be available to enough people and the cost would be low enough that large-scale assassination would essentially become table stakes. Like anyone could exert it, anyone could be involved in it. And so when you don't know if it's a government or if it's a fringe group or if it's a foreign national, that sort of thing just feels like it would introduce absolute chaos, just total chaos.
Yeah, it's really scary. And this might be a minor detail, but one of the things I found most chilling about the video was the whoops of approval and the applause among the peanut gallery for the demo of this kind of product, which sounds all too real to me that people would actually applaud this kind of thing.
There are certainly internet communities right now that are applauding that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We saw it within the chat groups that were attempting to organize the assault on the Capitol.
Right.
People applauding the idea of killing politicians who hold views that were counter to their own.
Yeah. So once again, I encourage our audience to watch the Slaughterbots video. We will post the URL to our Facebook page, but you could also just Google Slaughterbots video, and I'm sure it will pop up. It's well worth 8 minutes of your time. The maker of that Slaughterbots video is a nonprofit group called Stop Autonomous Weapons, and they insist that weapons that can autonomously select, target, and kill humans are already here. They cite a 2019 review of arms manufacturers, which notes that Turkey already produced a, quote, kamikaze drone that can select targets based on facial recognition, end quote. While Israel's Mini Harpy UAV can also independently detect, attack, and destroy enemy targets.
Though I will say, this doesn't protect us for a long time, but at least in the short term, the promise of facial recognition software is always way, way overstated because it's being sold to departments as a highly effective tool, police departments.
Yes.
And then all the reports I've read is that it turns out in practice to be almost completely ineffective. So I don't doubt that the Turkish government believes that it has a facial recognition weapon. I have a lot of doubt that it actually works, but that's not to say that in 10 years it won't work exactly as described.
Right. It's no secret that the USA, Russia, China, South Korea, and the UK are also investing heavily to develop and deploy fully autonomous UAVs. Unconstrained proliferation of such weapons is a cause of international concern, as Chinese manufacturers are already selling UAVs capable of full autonomy to the Middle East, a region that's not exactly known for its sober and deliberative use of weapons.
Certainly not.
I have another acronym for you, LAWS, LAWS, which stands for Lethal Autonomous Weapons System. I'm going to use that acronym frequently in this section so I don't have to keep repeating those 10 syllables. So LAWS equals Lethal Autonomous Weapons System. It's not as sexy a term as Slaughterbots. It's also a bit ironic that the acronym is LAWS because there are currently no laws on the books, domestically or internationally, banning or otherwise controlling these weapons. Domestically, the closest thing we have to meaningful regulation is a November 2012 Defense Department directive stating that, quote, autonomous and semi-autonomous weapons systems shall be designed to allow commanders and operators to exercise appropriate levels of human judgment over the use of force, end quote. You can drive a Slaughterbot through that word salad. This shocking lack of oversight means that laws could soon be coming to a battlefield near you. Laws have been described as the third revolution in warfare after gunpowder and nuclear weapons. And once you learn a little about them, you understand why. They use artificial intelligence to identify, select, and kill human targets without meaningful human control. Kill decisions are made by algorithms, not human beings. Once launched, they can't be controlled or recalled. What's more, such systems will react more quickly than semi-autonomous UAVs guided by human operators. This fact in and of itself introduces significant risks like rapid conflict escalation and the lack of attribution for kill decisions.
Yeah.
According to the Stop Autonomous Weapons website, the potential use of facial recognition software makes these weapon systems uniquely equipped to selectively target specific individuals or groups by gender, ethnicity, or other biometric data. End quote. In our digital world, the code in these algorithms can be mass-produced and copied on the cheap, which greatly increases the risk of proliferation to non-state actors like domestic and foreign terrorists. The ease of acquisition and scalability of small, inexpensive laws has led some people to classify them as weapons of mass destruction. If there's any good news here, it's that lots of well-meaning people around the world are thinking critically about the chilling prospect of slaughter-bot-type laws and imagining ways to avoid that dystopian future. Human Rights Watch launched a campaign to stop killer robots in 2013, calling on all nations to swiftly negotiate a new international treaty and craft national laws and policies asserting human control over the development, production, and use of such weapons. The Future Life Institute, a nonprofit focused on maximizing the benefits of technology by minimizing its risks, issued a statement that, as of the last time I checked, was signed by 247 organizations and more than 3,000 individuals, most of them AI and robotics researchers, but also including Elon Musk, Alan Alda, and your vocal doppelganger, Mark, Morgan Freeman. The statement argues that increasingly powerful AI should always be safe and aligned with human values, and it concludes with these words, and I quote again, "We opt to hold ourselves to a high standard. We will neither participate in nor support the development, manufacture, trade, or use of laws." End quote. I already mentioned Stop Autonomous Weapons, the group that made the Slaughterbots video to raise awareness of this issue. They recommend that even if an outright ban is not feasible right now, intermediary options could be used to ensure human control in the near term while helping to generate the political will for an eventual treaty.
Mm-hmm. Well, that seems entirely well-intentioned. It strikes me that you are only going to get compliance from signatories. So, for instance, from North Korea on one end to maybe the Proud Boys on the other, there are so many organizations, large and small, that would have no particular incentive to sign, or even if they did sign, honor the terms of such a treaty. So, I mean, there is, I imagine, some value in getting major players like the U.S. and Russia and China to sign on to such things, but it in no way would solve the problem.
Yeah, that you're quite right, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But the one thing you might not be right about is that it might be the major powers who are the biggest obstacle, and I'll explain that in a minute. So apart from those private efforts I was just describing, there are also 30 countries joined by 165 NGOs and more than 4,500 researchers that have called for a preemptive ban on laws because of ethical concerns about operational risk, accountability, and compliance with the laws of war. Interestingly, China is one of the 30 countries calling for a treaty to ban the use of laws, but not their development or production, which makes zero sense except when you consider that China is already making and selling these weapons.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people around the world who view laws, these lethal autonomous weapon systems, as intrinsically amoral and posing a grave threat to the security and well-being of all nations. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, stated in 2018 that, quote, Machines with the power and discretion to take lives without human involvement are politically unacceptable, morally repugnant, and should be prohibited by international law." End quote. In 2013, the UN convened a group of government experts to discuss this subject in a regular forum in Geneva, Switzerland. The group spent several years deliberating and debating in an attempt to develop what they called a normative and operational framework for their policy recommendations. Two bright red lines emerged from those talks. One is that there is a positive obligation of meaningful human control over all anti-personnel weapons, including laws, meaning that the decision to take human life should never be delegated to machines. The second is that there must be prohibitions on weapon systems that are incapable of meeting the requirement of meaningful human control. At the end of 2019, the UN group issued a list of 11 non-binding guiding principles on the use of laws that flow from the two bright line determinations I just mentioned. I'm not going to read all 11 of these guiding principles, but I'll give you a flavor of some of them. The first one says that international humanitarian law, which was developed after World War II to better define the obligations of warring parties in sparing civilians from the horrors of war, should apply to all weapon systems, including laws. Other guiding principles say that there must be accountability via a responsible chain of human command and control, that measures must be taken to protect the physical security and cyber security of such weapons so they don't get in the hands of terrorists, that emerging technologies in the design of laws should not be anthropomorphized. So no Terminators. Sorry, Arnold. And any steps taken in this area should not hamper progress in or access to peaceful uses of intelligent autonomous technologies. And to that last point, the U.S. government released a white paper in March 2018 specifically to underscore how emerging technologies like AI and machine learning have great potential to improve our quality of life via applications like driverless cars and artificial assistance. In other words, let's not throw away the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
The paper went on to list how so-called smart weapons can potentially make war more humane by saving lives via things like autonomous self-destruct or self-deactivation mechanisms, or by helping commanders increase their awareness of the presence of civilians on the battlefield. They can also reduce casualties by scouting terrain ahead of forces conducting patrols in environments where they might otherwise be surprised by roadside bombs or enemy ambushes.
Sure.
There are profound implications for the lack of human agency and human intention in laws. The UN group is still wrestling with many vexing issues. Here are just a few of them. What does autonomy mean? Is it a spectrum, or can it be clearly delineated? Can full autonomy exist in some functions like navigation and not others like target selection? And what constitutes meaningful human control, which is a phrase I read over and over and over again in the context of these deliberations?
Yeah.
What is meaningful human control? Does it mean real-time human supervision during all aspects of operation? Or is it enough for the human element to be reasonably temporally proximate to the system?
Yeah. Or present at the moments of critical action.
Yeah.
Like you said, with not a drone, a UAV broadcasting 24/7 a feed of what's coming in over its sensors and in the air for months at a time, it's probably unreasonable to expect a human being to be carefully monitoring every moment within that.
Right.
But if there comes a point where a missile is going to be deployed, then I would imagine that meaningful human control means a human being is there analyzing the data, considering the possibility that something is incorrect in what's being perceived,
Yeah.
and then making the judgment call that the machine can't be trusted to do on its own.
Yeah, well, that thought process you just articulated is the very thing that's being deliberated in these closed-door UN meetings. And here's one other. This is something you touched on a couple minutes ago when you were talking about the flaws of facial recognition. How does autonomy affect data bias, in which algorithms used for targeting weapons potentially perpetuate or amplify the gender and racial biases of their programmers?
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is a huge problem in machine learning, which is that machine learning draws inferences from data sets. And if the data is biased, then the algorithm that the machine learning develops is going to contain the same bias. And it shows up in so many different systems. Like, for instance, companies that are using AI to evaluate which resumes should be passed on to hiring managers are finding that the AI only selects for the sort of people who have already been hired at that company, which tends to be white males who came from a certain set of colleges.
Yes.
And so again and again and again, AI and machine learning is running into problems of bias. And if lethal force is drawing on that, then yes, that would be pretty bad.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of smart people who think that AI should not be used in this context of autonomous warfare at all. But if it's going to be used, let's at least get the damn thing fixed so it doesn't make those kind of mistakes.
Right.
So there are going to be further meetings of this UN group in August of this year. But the big event on the horizon is what they're calling the 6th Review Conference in Geneva on December 13th through 17th, 2021. So what is that, 7 months from now, where the group will produce a final policy document for signature by all its members. The United States has participated in every group meeting since its inception and has already submitted its generally favorable reactions to the guiding principles. But the challenge with UN groups like this is that they require the consensus of all participating countries on any policy recommendations. A single nation can block an agreement sought by everyone else, which can lead to what Human Rights Watch calls lowest common denominator decision-making. Given that several countries in the group, like China and the US, are actively engaged in developing laws, the probability of reaching unanimity is low. Even so, the hope is that enough pressure and stigma will be generated to influence the behavior of countries who choose not to sign the communiqué. And that's what I meant when I said a couple minutes ago that the major powers might be the biggest stumbling block here because they're already developing these weapons. So are they going to be willing to sign a document that says they should be banned? No ifs, ands, or buts.
And even if they sign, are they going to continue on with the Skunkworks project, which operates in defiance of the agreement?
Correct. So just in case you're wondering, because I was wondering about this, the U.S. government's official position on the use of laws as of December 2020 was summarized by the Congressional Research Service as follows. I quote, U.S. policy does not prohibit the development or employment of laws. Although the United States does not currently have laws in its inventory, some senior military and defense leaders have stated that the United States may be compelled to develop laws in the future if potential U.S. adversaries choose to do so. End quote. The same document also says that the U.S. does not currently support a ban on laws, and regards proposals to negotiate an international treaty to ban such weapons as, quote-unquote, premature. Of course, Donald Trump was still president last December.
Yeah.
And the Biden administration has already ordered a comprehensive review of our UAV program. So we'll see whether the U.S. reverses course and signs the UN policy document. But that's when the rubber meets the road, this December.
Yeah.
Now, I hope the multi-year UN effort ends in a treaty or in regulations that the U.S. and all other countries can sign on to. It's both my hope and my belief that something like that will emerge eventually. That said, I agree with the premise of your original question, Mark, that some form of fully autonomous combat is probably inevitable. So who's most likely to use such weapons first? I really don't know. But my guess is that it'll be a corrupt criminal state with a leader who's accountable to neither the international community nor his own people, and who has the motive, means, and opportunity to do the dirty deed. Russia fills that description perfectly. I can easily see a scumbag like Putin authorizing the use of laws in a place like Ukraine.
Right.
I'm less sure about whether he'd ever admit it.
No. He would deny everything.
Yeah. Unless he wants to brag about it. That's why I'm not sure, because besides being a scumbag, he's also a narcissist. If the arms race for laws continues, I can also see a nation deploying them early in a hurry to match the presumed progress of its adversaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we're going through this, it strikes me there's a lot of parallels between autonomous weapons and chemical and biological weapons, that they have been illegal for a long time, and yet there have been countries that, as an open secret, have been developing them nonetheless. And so if we're looking for which country is most likely to deploy autonomous weapons first, it's the same sort of country that has used chemical or biological weapons recently.
Yeah.
Like, so for instance, Iraq under Saddam Hussein,
Right.
who used them against his own citizens.
Syria
It would be that sort of
under
scenario.
Assad.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. I had not considered that. I guess I'm grasping for a positive spin on what you just said, and that would be that even though those weapons have been used, I think it's fair to say they're not completely out of control. Like, there is some mechanism in place to try to limit their use. So
Yes.
I'm hoping the same kind of regime develops around this.
It's going to be a terrorist organization that uses it first. And that doesn't necessarily mean, foreign terrorists. It could be domestic terrorists. But some version of this is going to show up because it's disproportionate force. It's a small thing
Yeah.
that you can carry around in a backpack that can potentially take out a president or a senator or a CEO or whoever it is that you're angry at. And it's just going to be irresistible to the sort of person who doesn't have an army's resources.
Yes, it can be so cheaply developed, relatively speaking.
Right.
Yeah.
So where we might be concerned about what the U.S. or China or Russia would do with this, I'm much more concerned with what ISIS or the Proud Boys or white supremacists or God knows who,
Yes.
what they're going to get inside their minds, maybe using equipment that they pick up off of Amazon.com.
This is why the proliferation issue is so important, right? Because it's one thing if you've got them yourself and you're only going to use them on some last resort mutually assured destruction scenario like we had in the Cold War. But if you're selling the fucking things to the Middle East,
Right.
for crying out loud, you're just begging for them to be used against you, probably.
Yeah, imagine where our country would be right now if someone had attacked Black Lives Matter protests with UAVs. And one side was saying it was the Trump administration, and another side was saying it's not the Trump administration, it's someone who's trying to
Right.
defame the Trump administration. And then there would be so many paramilitary organizations that would be cheering it on Reddit and internet forums. And
And suddenly I just connected what you just said to our last topic of deepfakes, because we're coming to a point where the ultimate defense against something you may have actually done is to just say it was a deepfake. So similarly, the people who use these weapons will just deny, say it's the other side. And half the population in the U.S. will believe that.
Right. Yeah.
But if and when these weapons are used, I'm confident that the outrage of the civilized world would be directed against whoever dared to go first. And that might finally provide the impetus for the world to ban such weapons. So I'm going to take a pass on your second question about how the use of laws will change the nature of warfare, because I'm not convinced we'll ever get there. We've had nuclear weapons for more than 75 years, and they've only been used on people twice, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think the prospect of slaughter bots raises the same existential question, and I trust humanity to find its way to a solution, even if a rogue actor lets that genie out of the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I want to pivot to what the development of AI means for the nature of warfare, because this is fascinating. As you know, AI is already omnipresent in everything from Siri and Alexa to Google search algorithms to IBM's Watson computer that defeated the world chess champion, to the self-driving cars that we will soon see on our local roads. It's a critical component of products as disparate as pacemakers, automated stock trading systems, and the electrical grid. AI is also central to the facial recognition technology that's used by Facebook to tag people in photos and by military planners to target individuals for UAV strikes. The potential of this technology is seemingly limitless. Researchers in the AI machine learning space distinguish between two types of AI. First, there is narrow or weak AI, the kind we have now, in which the AI is trained to do one task, like playing chess, under very specific circumstances. This type of AI already presents plenty of challenges for warfare in the near term. For example, by 2040, we could have large numbers of robotic sea mines posing enormous threats to shipping lanes. Swarms of small unmanned helicopters, each carrying explosives, could destroy a military jet or even an air base if detonated at the right place and time. A malfunctioning weak AI wouldn't be capital C catastrophic. I think of it like this. Imagine a self-driving car that you want to take you to Maracaibo, but it takes you to Mar-a-Lago instead. Now that I think of it, that would be catastrophic, wouldn't it?
I'm reeling at the prospect of it, so yes.
Yeah. But then there's general or strong AI, the super intelligent version we don't yet have, that can be applied to multiple tasks and essentially think for itself. As the Future of Life puts it, I'm quoting again, such a superintelligence might help us eradicate war, disease, and poverty, and so the creation of strong AI might be the biggest event in human history. Some experts have expressed concern, though, that it might also be the last, unless we learn to align the goals of the AI with ours before it becomes super intelligent. End quote.
Yeah, the Skynet scenario.
Yes.
Where superintelligence arrives, but ethics does not, and then you deal with the consequences.
And that's what I want to talk about in the rest of our time. Because the advent of strong AI is no longer the dream of sci-fi writers. Most AI researchers polled at a 2015 conference in Puerto Rico guessed that it would arrive before 2060. The median guess was 2045. The reason why some people worry strong AI might be humanity's last hurrah is not because they fear machines turning evil like you see in the movies. The concern is about machines becoming competent. A superintelligent AI would, by definition, be very good at achieving its goals. So we need to make sure its goals are the same as ours.
Right.
Here's an example I read about ants that I think clarifies the potential danger. Humans don't hate ants. We might even try to avoid stepping on them if we see them in our path. But in some situations, we control the affairs of ants because of our superior intelligence. If we want to build something on the site of a huge ant colony, chances are that many ants will die because we will do what's necessary to achieve our goal. The worry is that strong AI might see us the same way we see the ants, as an obstacle to be removed on the way to attaining a goal. In other words, if we give up our position as smartest, we might also cede control of our own affairs to the smarter entity, the AI we've created.
Right.
None other than the smartest man in the world, Stephen Hawking, wrote about this before his death. I'm quoting Hawking now. Whereas the short-term impact of AI depends on who controls it, the longer-term impact depends on whether it can be controlled at all. End quote.
Right.
And that, my friend, is the ultimate nightmare scenario. Fully autonomous weapons in an age of strong AI is a prospect I don't even want to contemplate. I hope I'll have slipped away to that great podcasting studio in the sky by the time humanity is faced with that test.
Yeah.
I assume you agree?
We'll have transitioned on to ghost-splaining at that time. I agree that it would, in fact, be terrifying. I will say that I take some comfort in the fact that general intelligence does appear to be a much more difficult task than most researchers have defined it as prior. As you say, AI research that's been successful so far has been within narrow fields, and it's mostly within the area of pattern recognition with current tools. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, a computer can beat anyone at chess or at Go because ultimately those are about pattern recognition. But if you take those extremely expensive and highly trained systems of beating your pants off at chess, those systems cannot do anything else. That's the only thing that they can do. You cannot ask to come up with a better recipe for banana bread. All it can do is play chess. And what I've seen, because this is a topic that's been fascinating to me for a long time, is that researchers are kind of moving the goalpost. Like there's the old Turing test. Are you familiar with that?
No.
So Alan Turing, the British mathematician who was around when the first computers were being built and they were first starting to talk about computer intelligence, came up with sort of a hypothetical test, which is called the Turing test after him. And that's where you have a test in which there are human subjects who are in one room and they're having a text conversation with a participant who's in another room. And that participant is either another human being or it's a computer. And Turing said that your computer has achieved general intelligence when a majority of subjects are not able to identify the computer as the conversation partner. Mm. And so for decades, for generations, scientists were developing systems and bringing them in to see if they could pass the Turing test, and they failed and failed and failed. Because if you've ever engaged with an online chatbot, they tend to be very good within a very, very narrow range of topics, but then they get kind of loopy if you get outside of that.
Right.
It only takes 2 or 3 questions to figure out that you're talking to a computer. I read recently that some prominent AI researcher has announced that he's just over the Turing test, that he's decided that it's irrelevant. And to my mind, that's an admission that they don't know how to develop the kind of intelligence that could show up in a podcast like this, where either you or I, Joe, is actually a computer program, and our listeners would not know the difference. That
right.
After all of this research, it's still a very remote goal. So I do believe that AI is advancing rapidly within the narrow intelligence space, within pattern recognition and speech recognition and that sort of thing. What I'm not convinced of is that we are advancing as rapidly to general intelligence. So it could be that we will be well into episode 200 of Ghostplaining by the time that anyone has to deal with that.
Mm. Well, I kind of hope you're right about that, but the AI experts themselves, maybe they're being overly optimistic, but they think it's going to happen potentially in our lifetime.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I read the same stuff. And I really feel like this is another episode. We should swing back around to AI research at some point because there's just so much to go into on that.
Yeah, or particular applications. So I have a question for you for next time. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready for it. Break it on.
All right. So as everyone is painfully aware of now, this episode was very acronym heavy. But I'm going to lay another one on you. NFT. Do you know what that stands for?
I do, and I wish I didn't.
Well, I'm afraid that's what I'm going to ask you about. Non-fungible tokens. What the heck is a non-fungible token? And here's why I'm asking. As you may have heard several weeks ago, Christie's auctioned an NFT by a digital artist known as Beeple for $69 million. What did the buyer get? That's what I'm wondering. I Googled NFTs and learned that they're unique files that live on a blockchain. What the heck is a blockchain? Please demystify this for me, Mark.
Okay, I will get to introduce you to NFTs and the wild and wonderful world of Bitcoin in our next episode.
Okay.
So if you have any thoughts on this episode or would like to leave comments on previous episodes, we have a Facebook page, as Joe mentioned, which you can find at Mansplaining Podcast. And we hope that you come by and give a like to our page, leave a few comments. And if there's a question you'd like to ask, like what the hell are NFTs, post it as a comment there, and we might answer it in a future episode. We love that you are a part of our audience, and we are hoping that our audience grows. And if you'd like to help us grow this podcast audience, you can do that by leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us as many stars as you feel like we deserve. Leave some comments and help people to discover this podcast.
And let me just add that if you do like us on Facebook, we will promise not to design a slaughter bot with your name on it.
Yes, we will remove your face from the facial recognition algorithm.
That we're working on right now.
Yes, hard at work. Getting back to it this afternoon. It will not target you, we promise. But so get those reviews in quickly because the Slaughterbot research is proceeding rapidly. And that's it for this episode. Thank you for spending some time with us, and we hope to see you again soon.
See you next time.
That's it for this edition of Mansplaining. Mansplaining is brought to you by Joe and Mark and nobody else. Thank you for hanging out with us for a little bit, and we'll see you next time.